Thank you, Pastor Orr. Next, if you would please rise, U.S. Navy veteran Dave Eberhardt will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please place your right hand over your hearts. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Have your seats, please. So tonight we're going to hear from Representative Hagedorn what is happening in our nation's capital, but he also wants to hear from you. So I know you've placed questions in the bowls over there. And before we explain about that's going to happen, I'd like to say, as we all know, and it is the spirit of Rochester, we live in a very civil community. So tonight is a family-friendly event. I think let's all be respectful of one another, of the questions that are asked. And with that, I just want to say that as we get going, the moderator, me, will take a question, read it, the congressman will answer, and if you would just stand when your question is asked, and we can identify you, we will move forward. So there are two bowls, one Olmsted County residents, the other one is for people who do not live in Olmsted County. And what the congressman wants to do tonight is really we will take the questions out of the Olmsted County bowl first. If there is time left, we will go to the other bowl. So without further ado, please welcome Congressman Jim Hagedorn.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I appreciate that. And Pastor, David, thanks for the pledge. I really appreciate your service to the country, as well as all the veterans that are here today who have served and defended and done everything we can to protect our freedoms and our way of life. And so, gracious thank you on that. It's an honor to be with you. I really appreciate the opportunity to serve you in Congress. I'm humbled by it. And these opportunities to get across the district, and we're going to do, and we just talked with a friend of mine out there, we are going to do 21 in person, every county. We'll go back to Nicollet and do a do-over there, and we're excited to be here. So there you go. Give you a victory right out of the box. How about that? So that's good. A little bit, just shortly, a little bit about me. I'm from Blue Earth, Minnesota, where I was born. I grew up on a farm over by Truman, Minnesota. My father and grandfather, great-grandfather, all southern Minnesota farmers. My mother happens to be here, Kathy, and stepdad, my sister Heidi. And those were the best days in the world. At some point, my father was elected to Congress. We spent time in Washington. I had experience out there. And as many of you know, we ran for this seat 3 times in a row before we won it. And it's just getting across the district, meeting the folks, the best part of the job. And so I'm really looking forward to the next 90 minutes, the give and take, the talk about the discussions. Thanks for being here. Just a little bit about the job. And by the way, I'd be remiss. Unfortunately, my wife couldn't be here today. She had to be at another meeting, and she has a store up north, Jennifer, and she wishes you well. A little bit about how it works in Congress these days. The schedule, typical week is this. They call votes on a Monday night or a Tuesday night. So I fly out there that morning. We have meetings during the day. We vote at night. And then for a couple, 3 days longer, we do business. And then at the end of that, Thursday night, usually I fly back. So it's fly out Monday, fly back Thursday. I've come back to the district every time. Didn't stay out in Washington, came back, worked the district. And that's the best part of it. So that's kind of how the schedule works. You know, you stay out there about a third of the time, and then you have breaks like next week. We have the July 4th break. We'll have big breaks in August and spend time in the district and do that. The basic responsibilities of the job are pretty much this. They hand you a voting card. This is the voting card that I put in the machines. You put it in there. Senator Senjum has a similar card. I take it. Oh, in the Senate, you might just vote. You might just vote by, here, I'm here, right? Yes and no. But in ours, we have 435 members, so we need the electronic devices to get it done. Put it in, press green for yes, red for no, yellow for present. Haven't done that one yet, and that's how that works. So that's a big part of the responsibility. That's where we move the country one way or the other. The House of Representatives is a body that's controlled, one vote more than half. You have all the power. Right now, the Democrat Party has the power, And we're in the minority, and we can talk a little bit about what my strategies are and how I try to represent you in that capacity. But that's that part of it. The second is that we serve on committees. And I told you when I was running for this job that the one committee that I really wanted to be on was agriculture. And we went to the mat, and our leaders out there helped me get on agriculture. The way it works is your own party decides where you serve. And so we're on the agriculture committee and small business committees. And I serve, for instance, on the livestock committee, which is important because southern Minnesota has a lot of hogs and a lot of livestock, dairy cattle, and everything else. So we're excited about that opportunity. The third thing that we do is we co-sponsor and we sponsor legislation. We have a bill that we're just about to drop. We're working with several Democrats to make that happen. I'll talk about it a little bit later. It has to do with promoting, and this is a good spot to talk about it, vocational training, to make sure that the people that want to be in certificate programs, that want to do apprenticeships and things like that are on a par when it comes to using their own money with 2- and 4-year institutions. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Another big part of the job is casework. And we have a district manager, Carol Stevenson, over there. Many of our staff in the district, people like Ryan Altman and Aaron Eberhardt, who work this particular area. And at some point, Carol will come up and talk with you a little bit about what types of things that our office can do if you have any problems with government. You know, it could be, it's not, everybody has a problem with government. Right? So, but interact with government. Maybe you had a social security issue, missed payment. Maybe there's an agriculture situation that you want to get resolved. Immigration cases, passports, whatever. And Carol will come up and explain what we can do for you and how to stay in touch with us. And then lastly, and this is really one of the neatest parts of the job, I'm looking forward to this, and it has to do with nominating people to our service academies. So right about in the spring, we get people out there about 16 years old, juniors, and say if you're interested in maybe going to West Point or the Naval Academy, any of those types of institutions, please see us, apply. There'll be a board that will check it out. We'll make a decision. We send that along, and then when you're accepted, you get to go out there and defend our country and have a great future with that education. So those selections are made in the fall. So if you know anybody now, I think you can still get in and apply. So that's a great deal. When I ran for this job, I made some promises. I told you that I was a conservative that wanted to utilize the job as a conservative reinforcement in the Congress. I was very, very clear with the voters about my positions on the issues. And I said that if elected, I would have 4 basic priorities. The first priority is to make sure that we have a military and foreign policy of peace through strength, and that we have secure borders and the rule of law on immigration. The second priority is that I said we need to make sure that we continue to grow our economy with high-wage jobs. And in my view, a lot of that can be done through good government. Needless regulations need to go away. Tax reform for individuals has to happen. We need to have patient-centered medical care. That's where I'm coming from on health care. And we'll talk about all these issues. Energy independence for the United States and expanded trade opportunities. Those are the types of things that we can do at the federal level, in my view, that is going to make things better. Grow our economy, help people out across all of southern Minnesota, and our nation. The third thing that I promised, and we're very straightforward, I'm going to go out there and do everything I can to work to protect the basic constitutional rights of the American people, and there were 3 that are under attack by the opposition, by the left, in my view, these are what I ran on, that I would be straight on. The right to life, the right to keep and bear arms for law-abiding citizens, and the right to religious freedom. They all deserve protection, but those are the 3 that I said were most under attack, that I would be strong on those positions. The last is that we have to sustain our economy and our way of life across southern Minnesota. This is the priority where it's all parochial. And in this district, our district starts all the way at South Dakota, it's all the way over to Wisconsin, Iowa up about 80 miles, 21 counties. Big rural district. This is by far the largest city. It's the 3rd largest city in our state. This is by far the most dynamic economy in the district. And there's a lot going on here with Mayo Clinic, medical care, and it's a vibrant, wonderful community. We're going to talk about that. So make sure that we sustain private medical care, patient-centered medical care, which is critically important, especially for this county and across southern Minnesota and our nation. That's important. Second, sustain agriculture and our rural way of life. And third, support and sustain small business and manufacturing, which helps especially our laborers and others, and it creates the jobs and the new businesses and expanded businesses that become even larger businesses. So those are the priorities that I ran on. That's exactly what I told you I was going to do with the job. I believe thus far my voting record reflects that. I believe thus far the work that we've done out there reflects that. But we're going to talk a lot about it. And rather than go on and talk about some other things now, what do you say we get started with some questions?
Yes, sir, and I just recall that you asked me to say thank you to all in the audience who serve the public. I mean, we are very fortunate to have people here who ran for mayor, Cindy Maves before, Regina Mustafa, who put themselves out there to serve the public. We're very fortunate to have the police chief here and our city attorney and Dave Senjum. And I think I saw a school board member come in before. So if we could all give a big round of applause to those who put themselves out there and to those who serve. Okay, so let's begin, Congressman. This question comes from Deb Staley of Rochester, and she asks that in regards to the Mueller report, please comment on the statements made by Mr. Mueller. If we had confidence that the president had clearly not committed a crime, we would have said so. Charging the president with a crime was therefore not an option we could consider. What are your thoughts, and have you read and or listened to the Mueller report?
Yeah. Well, there's conflicting statements on that. Mr. Mueller, I believe, is going to testify in front of Congress I think in July here sometime. So there'll be more to clarify. We're not going to solve the Mueller report tonight. We went through it. My chief of staff and I went through every page of this. This is both the volumes. There's like page 180, 181. It says the Trump campaign was approached by people in Russia and other foreign adversaries. They were asked to participate in the help in the campaign, and they said no. That the Trump campaign rejected it. It had nothing to do with it. As far as I'm concerned on this whole thing about collusion, Trump colluded with Russia, all this stuff, game over at that point for me. At this point, based upon the evidence, based upon what's presented, I would not vote for impeachment. I don't intend to. But really, if that's what you want, if that's where you're going, your gripe isn't with me. I don't control the floor. I don't control the hearings. We don't control anything. The Democrats do. Speaker Pelosi and all the investigations they're doing. And we'll see. They haven't even opened an impeachment inquiry. If they do, then it may go somewhere. But it also may mean that if they don't move forward with impeachment, maybe they don't have anything. But we'll see how that goes. As it stands, I don't believe we're going to solve the Mueller report tonight. I would not vote for impeachment. I don't believe they did anything wrong in the campaign.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Deb, for the question. The next question comes from Janine Yanish of Rochester, and she asks, why is there more regulation for taking the SAT test than for purchasing and using a gun?
Well, that's not true. No. Look, there are hundreds of laws on the books across this country on firearms ownership, and where I've come down, I'm very clear. I think, first of all, the laws that are on the books should be exercised. People should be held accountable when they misuse weapons, and that if people do it, they should be prosecuted, put in jail, sent away. We don't want anybody who's not supposed to have a firearm to get a firearm. That's why these laws are on the books. But it's one of the most highly regulated areas there is. I think we have a lot of laws on the books, and if we use them, we wouldn't have as many problems. But I will say this. Look, it is the constitutional right of every law-abiding citizen in this country who follows the prescribed law to defend themselves and to use firearms for legal purposes, and I support the Second Amendment.
Thank you, Janine, and thank you, Congressman. The next question comes from Taylor Williams. Congressman, can you please describe an example of a time that you disagreed with President Trump when representing our district?
Well, thus far, we've had a lot of votes that the Democrats have brought up, so we've been given the choice. President Trump doesn't put legislation on the House floor. Where I said in the campaign I disagreed with the president, quite frankly, is when he signed big omnibus spending bills that don't allow us to reform government, don't allow us to go in there and attack the bureaucracy when they're doing it wrong, and make changes to try to lower and limit spending in this country. We have a $22 trillion debt. At some point, that thing's going to unravel and explode. It is a ticking time bomb that is going to cause us problems, and I think we should be addressing it, both sides. Right now, there doesn't seem to be an appetite in Washington on either side to address it, and perhaps that's what you get sometimes when you have the House is Democrat, the Senate's Republican, and the administration's Republican. Maybe that's what happens. I don't know. But I can tell you, I promised that when we get into the appropriation season, if they don't get their individual appropriations bills through, the House and the Senate, which they need to, and I think the Senate needs to change its 60-vote rule to at least get spending bills through with 50 votes, but that's another story. If they don't do that and they come back with a big omnibus bill for spending, I will not vote for it. I told them that's not the way to run the railroad, and they need to work it out. So that's one thing, and that has to do with literally sometimes trillions of dollars, and so that's a big deal. Let's just get this straight. A lot of folks on the opposition, this is not a campaign event tonight. This is a House of Representatives sponsored event. I'm not here to campaign. We're going to talk about the opposition party. We're going to talk about my views, but I'm not here to campaign against candidates or anything like that. Nobody should be here to campaign against me since it's a taxpayer event. But, you know, let's be honest. I'm a conservative. I've been a conservative my whole life. I've taken these positions on whether it's peace through strength, border security, reform of the government, my entire life. They are the exact same philosophical positions that I've had long before Donald Trump ever ran for president. And the fact that he and I ran in 16 on parallel tracks on a legislative program that lined up doesn't make me, you know, his lapdog, and it doesn't make him following me. I took positions before the president, and he then took them. You know, we have some instances of that. So I'm a conservative. I'm going to go out there and vote as a conservative and try to get our positions through. But there are going to be times when the Democrats will make me take tough votes, and they're going to be tough to explain. We already had one. But there's a kind of a theory, a strategy of what we're trying to do in the Republican House in order to make things better legislatively. A couple of months ago, they had a disaster supplemental bill. There were a lot of problems. It didn't affect Minnesota. There was no money in it for Minnesota. A lot of money for Georgia, Florida, places where they had hurricanes. You know, tough times. People needed help. Not just farmers, but everybody needed help. It was a $20 billion bill. Speaker Pelosi brought the bill to the floor. It was supposed to be emergency spending. There's a lot of stuff in there that wasn't emergency spending, all right? And as a conservative, I'm like, we want to help people when they're down. We want to have emergency supplemental spending bills, but we don't want to use it to load up the kitchen sink. So I voted no on the first bill. And there were 150 of us at least that voted no. And you know why we did that? So the Speaker of the House couldn't go over to the Majority Leader of the Senate and say, boy, we got a veto-proof deal over here. You better just take our bill. And then they go to the White House and say, it doesn't matter what you do, you're in trouble. We're going to pass it in the House. Because we gave the president the votes to sustain a veto, they went and negotiated with the Senate. Senate went to the administration. They brought the bill back. I voted for it when they brought it back because it was a better bill. That's some of the stuff that goes on out there, some of the strategy. And when you're in a minority, those are the types of things you do. You try to empower your people to get the best deal for the American people that fits your philosophy. And it's not perfect. That supplemental bill still wasn't perfect. We're going to talk about the one they passed yesterday on the border. That wasn't perfect, but sometimes that's what you have to do.
Thank you, Congressman. Janet Munger says that she's very concerned about family separation at the border. This is causing emotional damage to these kids. And how do you justify this government-sponsored child abuse?
It's not government-sponsored child abuse, all right? Let's go over this. Hang on. These are not concentration camps. No, they're not. Well, I'll tell you what. Then on that, we fundamentally disagree. We'll just start there. they will fundamentally disagree on that. This is the United States of America. This is the greatest country in the world. There is a difference between a concentration camp as we know it, and everybody knows what you're talking about, Nazi Germany, and what's going on. The people that are there, they can leave. Nobody is holding them against their will. They can leave, all right? All right, so second of all, do we have compassion for everyone? We have compassion for everyone. We have compassion for everyone. It starts with the American people. My compassion first and foremost, and what we do with this job is we defend this country and we protect the American people. That's the first thing that we do. That's the first thing we do. So now here's the deal. Let's talk, we'll just, if you don't mind.
Excuse me, Congressman. I think let's remember the rules that we said with here. This is a civil discussion. Let's be respectful of different opinions, and let's listen. Thank you.
Well, let's go through the whole immigration. Let's talk a little bit on immigration, all right? We'll get it all out. I'll let you know where I'm coming from. We'll have a give and take. Who asked this question? Do we know? Yes, ma'am. Maybe we'll have a little give and take, okay? So let's talk about it. The situation on the southern border of the United States has been chaos and trouble since Ronald Reagan. I worked on the Hill during the 80s. They had a big deal. Reagan was going to get his money for border security. We were going to give him amnesty to 3 million, and the whole thing was going to be solved. That never happened. We never got the border security. And over the last 40 years, it's become a problem. We have in this, but let's start with the good news. The good news is I support legal immigration. I'm 100% for people coming here legally, doing it the right way. I do not support illegal immigration. I'm very clear about that. Because you have to have the rule of law and an order. We'll talk about the whole thing, all right? We'll talk about the whole thing, all right? We'll get through it. We'll get through the whole thing. If you want to have a discussion and give and take, that's fine. If you're going to try and convince me of something, it probably won't work tonight. I won't convince you either, but we'll have a discussion. We'll have a discussion. So laws on the books, yeah. Legal, good. Illegal, not good in my view. Now, we have 60 million people in the United States, and this is a good thing because think about it. Every year we bring in 1 million people legally. 1 million. We are the most generous country in the world on immigration by far. It ain't even close, all right? It's not even close. You can combine the next 5 countries and they don't even bring in 1 million people legally into their country. Very little. Now, that's good. We celebrate that. 60 million people living in the United States today are foreign born. 60 million. They didn't get here because we were bad guys and trying to keep them out. They got here because we had a system of legal immigration that is the best in the world and the most generous in the world. We should celebrate that. We never talk about that. Everybody's always so mad. Let's talk about how we have 60 million people that didn't even grow up in this country here. That's a good thing, right? I think it's a good thing. But we also have 20 million people, 12 to 20, 25, whatever the number is, we don't know because nobody knows, who are here unlawfully, who came to our country, either ran over the border and are still here, and a good chunk of them, about 5 million at least, flew into the country on a temporary visa and never left. Now, either you think that's okay, you don't think that's okay. The rules are they're not supposed to be here, they're supposed to come here in a lawful way. What do I support? And then we'll get into the give and take, we'll talk about it a little bit. I support securing America's borders. I support physical barriers to make sure that we have an orderly system so people, when they come into the country, come through checkpoints. I support fixing the visa and passport system with biometrics and other things so we know who's coming here, we know who's staying here and overstaying, and we can identify them and try to do something about that because they're not all bad people, but if you overstay, we don't know who they are, we don't know where they are, we don't know what they're doing. There were some on 9/11 that overstayed visas that if we had a better system, maybe would have caught it. You go to third world countries, folks, Oh, I'm sorry. You go to third world countries, it's common term. You go to third world countries, you overstay a visa, you stay there long, they fine you, they put you in jail. This is what happens all around the world. We're more lenient than others. But, so, fix that. No more of the sanctuary cities. Let's have some law and order. Let's do what we have to do to fix the asylum rules and things like that so we can have an orderly process for people, so we don't have a magnet where they come up here and risk their lives and sometimes die and all these other terrible things. Let's try to have an orderly, systemic process that can be good for people around the world that want to come here and good for our citizens. Then we need a system where people can come and go and work and fill needed jobs. And some areas like dairy have never had this. They should. We've been fighting for this. And so our economy can thrive, people can make money, they can make choices, and they could build up credits towards citizenship if they want to. All right? That's kind of where I come from. That's what I would like to see done. The president, in many ways, kind of wants the same thing. The opposition party really doesn't. And we're at a big crossroads. How are we going to get it done? I don't know. These people come in here now, and some of the laws, it's got everybody, back and forth. Nobody knows. So, ma'am, just in a nutshell, if you answer a couple questions, I'll let you talk. What do you think? Yeah, I mean, 60 million versus, that's pretty good, right? You got a lot of foreign-born folks. That's good. Should we ever limit the number of people that can come to America? No, hang on. Should we? Is that fair?
I'm not so concerned about that as what is actually happening. It's
Okay, no, we're going to get to the border.
all these plans are fantastic if they were in place, but they're not in place now. And
Well, no,
we have these
some of us-
little
I'm sorry.
children- Can I just say this? These
Yeah.
little children that are being held against their will, on their own, without their parents, and they cannot get up and leave anytime they want. How is a 3-month-old baby or a 4-year-old gonna leave a facility like that?
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. You want them reunited with the parents, and the parents can make decisions. But the second thing I would say is, under what the bill yesterday had to do with detention centers, and a lot of the Democrats voted against it. I voted for it. It was a compromise bill. But one of the reasons they voted against it is because there was money in the bill that would allow ICE to do its job. Under what circumstances should ICE be allowed to deport people who have illegally entered the country?
After a hearing as per the Constitution.
Okay? All right. No, hang on. So you support, I was talking with her, but whatever. But so you support, if a judge adjudicates a case and orders a person to be deported, then ICE should be allowed to go in and do its job.
If they get a hearing, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Any person who presents themselves at the border with a reasonable fear that they could be harmed or returned home is allowed a hearing under a refugee court.
Well,
Pages is a process of determining
Okay, I got that.
people from exercising.
Did you know that right now there are 1 million people who have illegally came in our country who have been adjudicated by a federal judge and ordered deported? 1 million. Do you know that?
They should, if there's a
All right.
standing order that they should be deported, that's fine. That's
Okay,
not what
all
we're
right.
talking
Hey,
about.
hang on. I'm not. We're just walking. Yes, sir. We are walking through the entire issue here. We're just trying to go through the whole issue.
Walk around the issue. Talking about children in danger.
Sir, please be respectful.
I protested them too.
All right. So anyway, there are orders for folks to be deported. ICE, when they go out and get people, those are the people they're getting, right? And all right. Let's just say they are. But there's a million people, so that's a good deal. Under what circumstances should our country have laws that says we have to limit people as to how many people come into our country? They have to come here legally, and if they do it wrong, we have every right to send them back to their country. Now, asylum and refugee, different. Refugee is a whole different thing. They come here, and they come and be permanent residents, and as long as everything's good, they stay. But asylum is different. Now, on the border, what's been happening recently, they've kind of gamed it a little bit. They come in, especially if they had a child, and they say, hang on, and they say, we're on U.S. soil. So now the government has 21 days to deal with it, and if they don't, we have to disperse them to the country, and it's become chaos. But so far, about 90% of the people who have been ordered to go to an asylum hearing have not showed up. Well, it is true. All right? Well, let's say, what is the percentage?
99% of people
All right.
who have representation show
Well,
up.
hang on. People who have representation. So you're,
85% of the people who don't have representation show up for
all right.
hearings.
Well, so the 15%, would you at least agree that under those circumstances, we should go ahead and say they didn't show up and they've been adjudicated by a judge and all that?
We're talking about
Okay.
85 and then 99%.
All right. So I think we're getting somewhere.
4-year-olds and cases.
So whatever the percentage is of folks that don't show up for their hearings, then they're eligible to be deported as well. Now, ma'am, hang on one second. So, ma'am, the border situation, you feel the conditions are not right. People would say that Obama did certain things in a similar way. It's the government. I don't think there's any intent to go out and hurt folks. We don't want to see anybody harmed. What do you want done for them? I asked her what she wants now.
Children that have been taken away from their parents
Ah.
are now not being cared to our government, even up to the standards of like U.S. daycare.
Okay.
I want those children to be reunited with their parents, wherever their parents are
Okay.
being held right now. They should be with their
And if obviously, if those aren't their parents, we don't want to reunite them with them, right? So,
I want them
okay.
reunited with their family.
Okay, so if we can find their parents, we reunite them, and then we put them on a course to do an asylum hearing, and they get their day, and we go through the process. Is that what you're looking for? Okay. Now, the legislation last night, I think it was good. It was a compromise. It said, let's spend the $5 billion, let's have more beds, let's do this thing, let's try to have accommodations for people, make sure that everything is better. But I think we're getting somewhere. They're saying, if you go through the process, it's okay. Not everybody will stay. But we want them to go through the process, a legal, orderly process. That's what I support. So in a lot of ways, I think we agree. But let's not say that just because somebody's in powers of government that they're bad, evil, mean people, and that this country is bad, mean. This is the best country in the history of the world. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. I think this next question from Joanne Kane speaks to what we're seeing here. And she says, in my 50 years of following politics, I have never seen a more divided country. What can you do to find common ground between Democrats and Republicans, and I would add, between people who are so angry at each other?
Well, I'm not angry at you. I'm happy to be here. So
No, I'm not saying you.
Out in Washington, you're there on the House floor. The Democrats and Republicans, we interact. We're personable to each other. Some of the characters you see on TV, some of those celebrity-type politicians, they're nice people. They're regular folks. We all get along. But we have very distinct different philosophies on what we think needs to be done to move the country one way or the other. And part of the genius of America is that when you have that divided government, sometimes a lot doesn't get done. The House has its rules to push the bills to the Senate. The Senate has its rules to slow everything down. And then the president has his or her position. And guess what? You veto the thing, you got to get even more troops to get it done. And that's kind of why the forefathers, the framers of the Constitution, they didn't necessarily want us to be snapping fingers and changing direction on a whim, because they wanted to have consistency and thoughtfulness and to abide by the Constitution and all this. So we can argue about all that. I personally think that there are 4 or 5 or 6 things that we can all agree on right now that we should be doing. Okay, yes, ma'am. As soon as I do this, go ahead. All right.
And the question was put, what can you personally do? Because I've read some of the stuff that you've written that seems to follow a train of thought that is discounting people that don't believe the same thing you do. And that's happening on both sides. But what can you personally do as our representative? This is not top down, this is bottom up. We have elected you as a representative from District 1, and we would like to know how you are going to ameliorate this so that we can feel that all of us are represented in a way that is respectful for all different reasons and all different ways that we see these issues.
All right, then. Since I've since I've been in office 6 months, I mean, do you have anything you want to point to that you're concerned about?
I believe that the rhetoric in the Republican Party right now has been very, very negative. I don't want to say that.
It's all your fault. Well, I think that you probably could get some agreement from everybody that the rhetoric on both sides can be tough. And at some...
Every person who represents us from a certain party.
Sure.
What can you do to make that difference?
Well, what I was getting at, and we'll talk about committee work, where there's a lot of bipartisan things that we're doing with Democrats to help our farmers. We're going to talk about some of the casework that we do to help people on an individual basis in the district. We're going to talk about getting around and dealing with different groups and learning about issues so we can take it back and offer legislation, which we're doing. Those are the kind of the nuts and bolts things of the job that not a lot of people pay attention to, and rightly so. You have better things to do. You're following the voting record, and then you're seeing what's going on in Washington. I agree with you that you watch TV and they're angry. Everybody's mad. Everybody calls everybody names. It's kind of ridiculous. What I was getting at is, I think there are 5 or 6 things right now where everybody in this, 80% of the country would agree that we should make some gains. The Senate people, the House people, the President. The first is on this concept, the bill, the free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada. My goodness. We had NAFTA. It was pretty good. They made it better. Why wouldn't we pass that? I mean, it's ridiculous that on a bipartisan basis, we can't bring that up. Everybody says they're for it, concerned that the speaker isn't even going to give us a vote. But that would be a huge economic win for the country. It would be good for laborers. It would be good for agriculture, manufacturers, machinery makers, medical, even here. Great. Can we agree to get that one done? There's one I support. So I was the first elected official in Minnesota to come out for that, and we're going to keep fighting for it. We sent a letter to the president and to the speaker saying we like your deal, get it done. Tom Emmer and Pete Stauber signed it with me. We offered it up to all the delegation. None of the Democrats wanted to sign. So that's what we're doing. Second thing we should be agreeing on is a transportation bill. We need infrastructure, whether it's roads and bridges, ports, whatever. We need it all. Let's get it done. I mean, my goodness, we should be able to sit down and work that one out. That one's about spending money. You'd think they'd get that done in a heartbeat, right? Get that thing done. And so here's another one. Here's another one. I mean, can we do something on prescription drugs to have transparency and cost, drive down cost? There were 3 bills that came out of Energy and Commerce on prescription drugs to try to drive down costs. Unanimous support. Republicans and Democrats, all out of Energy and Commerce, they're like, this is great. You get to the floor and it's got a bunch of Obama bailout stuff that the Republicans are never going to sign or vote for, that the Senate's never going to pass and the President will never sign because they wanted an issue. I'm like, why don't we just get it done? Let's vote on the stuff we agree on and move on to the other stuff later. Pre-existing conditions. Mr. Walden of Oregon, a friend of mine, Republican happens to be, got a bill. That will lock it down. Nobody ever going to worry again about losing their insurance based upon pre-existing conditions if we pass the Walden bill. It's supported by everybody on both sides, but they'll never bring it up because, like in this race, they want to have a campaign issue. I doubt if we'll see it. I hope we do. I hope they prove me wrong. There's other stuff, but we can do it right now. They could have gotten that stuff. The Violence Against Women Act. That would be the law of the land right now if Speaker Pelosi had brought it up the way the Violence Against Women Act had been for 30 years. But you know what she did? She threw in a bunch of gun control stuff that she knew Republicans were never going to support. The president won't sign and the Senate won't pass. And so now we're sitting around going, how come that's not done? They want to blame the Republicans. No. How about bring up the bill? How about to bring up the bill that'll have 400 votes? The same Violence Against Women Act that expired a year or so ago. Just bring it up. Let's get it done. So I think there are ways, and I'll be really brutally honest with you. It all comes down to whether or not the Democratic Party in the House will do things with the president to give him wins. And if they decide that they don't want to give him wins, we're probably not going to see much of this stuff. And that's the truth. That's where we are. So,
Thank you,
she
Congressman.
controls the floor. She controls the floor. What's that? I'm sorry?
O'Connell said when Obama became president that he wasn't going to pass anything.
Yeah,
Jim Ryan
I don't disagree with you.
control. So the things that you've been talking about, you know, about what Nancy Pelosi does, Tim Ryan was doing the same thing over a longer period of time.
Tim Ryan's actually a congressman running for president, I think. So, sir, I don't disagree with you. I wasn't there then. All I can tell you is what's going on now, and I think there's some these areas we could agree on, and we should agree on them and move them forward. The agreement with Canada and Mexico on trade is critically important because not only is it going to be good for our economy and help everybody, it helps us build momentum working these other trade deals. We're working a big deal right now with Japan. That is going to help southern Minnesota's pork farmers and beef farmers and others. It is the biggest deal out there besides China. But you get momentum for these deals, and you do Japan, Colombia, Great Britain, European Union. You go down the list, and now all of a sudden, China's in a little bit of a box. Maybe they got to negotiate a little bit more. And while we're at it, we'll just talk about the China deal. 2 months ago when that thing fell apart, here's what happened. Mick Mulvaney, the president's chief of staff, told our freshman class, the United States and China had 80 points of agreement, including templates on intellectual property and all these things for enforcement that was going to make things better. The things that we've needed to do for 20 years because China has been dumping steel. Now they're dumping quartz over there in Mankato and that area, trying to hurt our Cambria and other companies. They've been manipulating their currency. They've been stealing our intellectual property. This has not been good, and everybody has agreed it hasn't been good. Nobody wanted to do anything about it, and now we're trying. But we had 80 points of agreement with China until that day when the deal fell apart, and they called up and they said, Mr. Trade Secretary, we only agree to 40 of them now. And the 40 we agreed to aren't any of those things on enforcement. And they thought the president would cave. They thought we would give in and just take a bad deal to have a deal. He didn't. We plowed enough ground. We need to keep going. I think in the end, we'll get something done.
You're missing the point.
Next question.
Okay, let's go on to the next question. April Horn, where are you? Asks the question. Minnesota is one of 21 states whose election systems were attacked by Moscow. Members of Trump's administration say Moscow will attack again in 2020. What should the federal government do to help states prepare to repel and or mitigate a cyber attack from Moscow?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think our enemies, especially countries like Russia, try to do whatever they can to undermine us. I suspect that they've done that since the Cold War, and they'll probably do it into the future. We had military people, others working at it, they know. And they'll try to subvert our economy. They'll try to do all sorts of things besides skew the elections. I signed on to a bill, it's a Republican bill, that would give money to the states to do these things, but the Democrats brought up a bill the other day that wasn't good. They want to nationalize our elections. And they want to say that the machines that we have are invalid, are not valid anymore, and they have to go replace them. So states run the elections, not the federal government. We need to allow the states like Minnesota, who will get it right, to do it and run their elections, and then we need to make sure that the federal government doesn't come along and say, well, now you have to have 100% paper ballots just for the heck of it, and all this machinery that you bought in Olmsted County and all that, we'll just throw it away because now we got to get rid of that. So that's where we are. We'll see. They'll probably come to some grand compromise and pass some bill. We'll hopefully sign on to it later on.
Thank you. Cecilia Digley asks, will you commit to reduce nitrate levels in southeast Minnesota groundwater? And she adds, due to excessive fertilizer.
Yeah, it's a state issue, and what's been going on there is I talked to the people in Lewiston, for instance. This is on the campaign. We used to go in and just talk to thought leaders. It wasn't a campaign thing. You never saw it. I never put it on Facebook or anything. We just go in and talk to people and say, how are things going? And to find out that hopefully if we did get the job, we'd be in a better position to help folks. But in Lewiston, they talked about how they set new standards. They believed that the standards weren't based on science, that a lot of cases, these smaller communities are having to spend $3, $4, $5 million for new wastewater treatment plants, which is enormously expensive for communities the size of Lewiston, less than 2,000 people. And it's pretty tough. I'm sure Senator Senjum's talked to a lot of people about these issues. But by and large, those standards are set by the state of Minnesota, and that's what's going on. So I have to defer a little bit on that.
Thank you. Vicki Morris says she wants to thank you and the Rochester office staff for listening to us, meeting with us, and taking action to help us with co-sponsoring of 3 anti-animal cruelty bills. Vicki, are you here?
Hello.
Hi, I had a really nice experience with your staff in Rochester. I work for the Volunteer for the Humane Society, and we are trying to fight animal cruelty. And we went in and met with your staff, and we talked to them about a bunch of bills, but one of them, I'll name 3 of the ones that Congressman Hagedorn co-sponsored. You know those awful crush videos where they take videos of people stomping on animals or strangling animals or drowning animals or cutting up animals while they're alive. So there's lots of these, and this makes that illegal. And it was never illegal before. And I don't know if they were aware of it, but as soon as they became aware of it, Congressman Hagedorn co-sponsored a bill called Prevent Animal Cruelty and Torture Act, which is he also co-sponsored one for horses where they put acid on their feet, little things to make them lift their legs high. And he also co-sponsored a shark fin one. And I don't know if these are issues given everything that you have on your plate. You're pretty busy, and this probably would never have come to your mind. But these guys listen.
Okay, I appreciate you saying
I
that.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
I think between you and you have some representation in Washington, they stopped by our office. I remember sitting down with one of the representatives about the shark fin situation and hearing about that. Most of these are bipartisan bills, right? I think.
They're very bipartisan. They're very bipartisan, and there's just a lot of people that care about it.
Well, thank you for letting us know. Appreciate that.
Kirk Payne asks, what scientists or science sources have you consulted to inform you regarding the issue of climate change?
Well, we'll walk through this one a little while too. So when it comes to climate change, I know many of you believe the science is settled, it's all done. 12 years, AOC tells us we have 12 years, and if we don't do X, Y, and Z, we're through. And I would start with this question. If that's true, what do you want to do about it? So whose question is that? Sir, you've had a lot of time. Can we hear from some others? Yes, sir. So your question?
Just one part of it, invest in battery technology.
Well, I don't disagree with that.
Research, development.
I'm with you 100%. Now, remember the Obama stimulus bill where they spent $800 billion? They took a lot of that money and spent it on battery tech. No, I'm not criticizing him. I didn't like the.
I answered this question though either.
I'm just responding to his thing on the batteries. So we'll talk about climate. We'll go through the whole thing. All right. So they did a lot of that with the stimulus. I didn't like the stimulus. I thought that was the money. They shouldn't have spent it that way. They should have done it through regular order. But they have invested a lot of effort to try to perfect that. You're right. The reason that's important is because with intermittent power sources, and we're talking electricity here, wind and solar, those are not base load power. That's intermittent. And you have to have battery storage technology in order to capture that power and utilize it in an effective way so the lights go on and you can use it as base load power, basically. And we don't have that today. That's why there is no path right now from the fossil fuel and other types of sources that we use for electricity to get to so-called green energy for all of our electricity. It's not possible. I had solar people in my office tell me no path because of the battery storage technology issue. Usually it requires more fossil fuels to make the batteries than you're ever going to capture from the renewables like solar and wind. That doesn't mean that solar and wind don't have a place in this and they can't help us generate power. We're doing that in southern Minnesota. But it does mean if you want base load power where you turn on the lights and your refrigerator doesn't shut down during the day and spoil your food and everything else, when it comes to electricity, we have to have an all of the above array. And that does, at this point, include almost 30% coal. It includes natural gas. It includes nuclear. It includes hydro. And yes, wind, solar, and others. So if we can get past that, if we can get to the point where we have that technology, it will free up a lot of this and allow the conversion in an efficient way. Now, I want to go back to the question. If the climate change situation is this dire, and this is where we're going, and we need to what should we do about it?
My question is, what science sources have you consulted
solved it? That was the question.
Well, look, I read articles like everybody else. There is a scientist over in Denmark. There's a scientist, Bjorn, whatever his name, over in Denmark. And he is a very liberal environmentalist. Very liberal. But he'll tell you that you should adapt to climate change rather than try to transform economies.
You consulted any of the scientists at our own University of Minnesota?
I'll tell you what, I'll sit down one next time we get a chance.
Sure.
So,
I'll give you a name.
all right, thanks.
Thank you.
So, no, let's go back to this. I really want to finish it. So what should we do?
Ban plastic.
Ban plastic? I don't.
There's a lot of places like New York that bans plastic bags.
Okay.
They're banning like containers to go, styrofoam, and I think there is a new material that can be used to replace all of these.
Because you make plastic out of oil, crude oil. Yeah. Got it. So here are the options. On the left, these are their options. You get carbon tax, cap and trade, Kyoto Treaty, things like that, Green New Deal. Now my position is that will totally transform the American economy, and they're not feasible at this point because we have no path to take us off of crude oil, and we have no path to take us off of electricity generation where we are. We have to have technology catch up to that in order to make that an efficient process. Otherwise, when you do it, it's going to be inefficient, and the cost of every product and service in the United States goes up because the cost of every product and service in our country is tied to energy. Everything. 40% of the cost of a bushel of corn to produce, energy, fertilizer, fuel, transportation, all that stuff. When the prices go up, and I would say needlessly because we're not getting anything more out of it, then you have reverberations across the economy. In the end, the consumers have less disposable income, and it hurts them the most. Also hurts our jobs, our manufacturers, our laborers, and everybody else. That's my position. So I support an all of the above strategy for energy at this point, all of it. I support U.S. energy independence, and right now the only source of energy that we import in the United States is crude oil, and we import about 20% of what we need. Because of the policies of this administration and Republicans, and some will disagree, we are now the largest exporter of energy in the world. We supplanted Saudi Arabia in that position. Because we're able to export our energy, especially natural gas, which is cleaner burning, we signed a deal with Taiwan, $35 billion, export natural gas. We can sign deals with Germany, Great Britain, Poland, places like that, so they can rely on us, a good and noble ally for their energy resources, rather than Russia. And if you think people aren't tough on Russia in the government right now, they are a one-trick pony, and it has to do with oil and gas. And the biggest thing that's been hitting them hard is the fact that the United States is drilling for oil and gas and flooding the world market with energy. That has crippled their economy in many ways. And I think it's good for our country. It keeps the downward pressure on the cost of living, and it's good for the American people.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer Verhagen of Rochester, where are you, Jennifer, asks, do you or your party plan on shutting down the government on September 30th?
I don't. But I don't want to have one of these big spending bills. They need to get the bills through. They need to have the individual spending bills through, and you can argue on both sides who shuts it down. But I don't think that's the way to run the railroad. I hope it doesn't happen. But we also don't want to fund things that we don't need to fund, and we should fight for what we believe. But let's try to have regular order.
Thank you. Miriam from Rochester asks, what do you consider a, quote, good health care for all, including every resident of the USA and its territories?
Well, let's get this one out. Let's talk about this one for a while. I'll tell you what, I can't travel to Rochester, Minnesota and not think about how critically important it is to maintain the highest quality medical care. I'm not talking about health care delivery, I'm talking about medical care in the world. We have the preeminent institution of medicine in all the world right here. People are flying in. We were at the airport today talking about helping them with a runway expansion, talking about some of the things they want to do to make improvements, to have routes going west so more people can have access to Rochester. And you think about people like Dr. Davis and others that practice over there, and it's just unbelievable. Thousands of people every week just flooding in here for the finest care in the world. And we never, ever want to do anything to undermine that. Now, let's go to Obamacare. I think both sides agree Obamacare isn't working. So I think both sides agree. The Democrats will tell you that Obamacare doesn't work because Republicans meddled in it, didn't fund it, didn't do it right, whatever. They screwed it up. The Republicans will tell you that Obamacare doesn't work because we told you it would never work. And it's driven up costs, it's undermined competition insurance, it's made things more bureaucratic from the top down in Washington, and right now we don't believe the solution is to stay where we are with Obamacare. And if you heard the presidential debate last night, the Democrats agree. I think only Biden was the one that said, well, we got to stick with Obamacare and do this. Others said, let's go Medicare for all. Others said, whatever we do, it's all going to lead to single payer. Everybody on that stage said the same thing. Every single one. Everyone admitted what they wanted. And so this will be the first election coming up in our nation's history where the people will have a clear choice, and they will know that if you vote for Democrats, you're getting single payer. They're going to do it. They'll have the power, and they'll do it. Now, no, that's okay. So let me tell you why I oppose that. I will never support single payer, and why I think it would be devastating to Olmsted County in southern Minnesota. Single payer is going to give you 50-cent reimbursement on the dollar. Single payer is going to give you restrictions on who doctors can see and when. It happens in every system. Hang on.
Let him
This
finish.
is my opinion. I mean, if you don't agree with it, it's okay. This is my opinion. Well, I can stipulate an opinion. It's okay. You have one too. So the single payer, in my estimation, 50-cent reimbursement on the dollar, restricts who you can see. The first page of Hillary's bill in '93 was, if you're outside the system, you can't get medical care. You have to do it inside the system so the government reimburses. And that's what they're going to do. The reason it's not in Obamacare is because they knew it wouldn't pass. But this time around, they're going for the whole deal. Now, this is an affluent city. It's growing. Home values are great. A lot of people moving in here to take high-wage jobs. It's terrific. Schools, everything's growing. Businesses, it's wonderful. But 50 cents on the dollar and single payer does not sustain the model of medical care that has worked here and across the district and the rural hospitals and many of the hospitals and doctors across this country. It will not sustain the model. Now, if you think you can find people in that industry that will say it will sustain the model, I'll be interested in them. I'll talk to them too. But this is my view. And so to defend the economic interest of Rochester and Olmsted County, I support patient-centered medical care.
Did you call on me, sir?
No, I didn't. I support patient-centered medical care to make sure that we have competition, all these things. What should we have? We should have people.
Madam, please sit down. Thank you.
We should have folks that can take care of routine care with pre-tax dollars to go out and shop for those things. Doctor visits, could be things even like MRIs, regular treatments, blood tests. If we had shopping and transparency and cost, which the president just signed an executive order the other day, things would be better in those areas. We should also have catastrophic coverage, not necessarily the first dollar to last dollar coverage from insurance companies. Have competition across state lines, that's true. Association plans. We need plans so if you have an association, you can set up a healthcare situation, and then people can go to small businesses and start working and say, will you support my healthcare plan that I have? How much money will you give me? Now people have portable benefits. They're not married to their job anymore. You can go job to job. You can have more flexibility. You do things like that. You follow it up with high-risk pools for people with pre-existing expensive medical needs. I have friends in this audience who have pre-existing expensive medical needs, treatments that cost sometimes millions of dollars. We never want to see those folks go without. We want them to get the finest care and have the best life possible. We don't want them to go broke, but we also don't want everybody else in the room to have to pay an exorbitant premium to carry the cost. So what if the insurance companies, they insure you up to a certain point. You reach that point, now the high-risk pool, paid for by the insurance companies or the government, backed up, they take it over. They pay for it. If that sounds familiar, it's what we had in Minnesota for the most part. We had 90% coverage before Obamacare. We had a system with high-risk pool for people with pre-existing expensive medical needs. It was working pretty good. And then it got all thrown apart. From there, guess what? If you do all those things, now you're in a position where if you live a healthy life, you have less health care, you actually get to keep your own money. Because there are a lot of people in this district. Now, I know it's not everybody, but on the individual market, farmers, business people, just folks over in Winona at Knitcraft, the hourly employees. Not them, but the others. They're paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year for premiums with deductibles so high, the insurance is worthless. That didn't happen before Obamacare, all right? That's happening now, and that's got to stop. That's got to stop. Well, ma'am, that's fine. If you want single payer, you'll go advocate for it, and you'll try to get people to pass it. But I'm flat out telling you right now, I do not support single payer.
Thank you. Diane Mary Hansen asked a question on health care, Congressman, and she says that AARP estimates Medicare could have saved $14 billion in 2017 alone if it had paid the same prices for drugs as the VA does. Will you support allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices like the Veterans Administration?
By the government. So the president's talked about that. They want to go in and negotiate, and he's doing whatever. I'll say on prescription drugs, there are some fixes that make sense. That the first thing again is we never ever want to deter the private sector from going out there and developing the therapies that are saving people's lives. The great problem that we have is it's expensive. The worst problem would be that they don't exist. And the reason other countries can charge less for those drugs is because they negotiate with the drug companies, but they're all piggybacking off of us. 95% of all the medical technology, prescription drugs, medical devices that occurs in this world that everybody else is enjoying happens in the United States of America. So you don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. So we don't want to do that. But let's just say, I had a friend who had Lou Gehrig's disease, terrible disease. What would we have paid to find something out there to give him a better life, a longer life? But there are only like 20,000 people at a time that have that disease. It afflicts people, and it unfortunately takes their lives usually very quickly. So there isn't a lot of incentive, I suppose, for companies to go out there and spend billions of dollars to try to say, how would they get their money back? Well, one of the ways that Speaker Gingrich, when he was in Congress, he had an idea. He said, let's have bounties. So if a company goes out there and makes life-saving changes, and a panel gets together, docs and others, let's have a bounty. Let's say normally you need $1 million per deal to make this back. Let's have the government pay a bounty, make them whole, so then the consumer, the patient, can purchase that drug, that life-saving drug, in an inexpensive way that doesn't burden everybody in society again with your drug plans and things like that. We should all, I advocate this, we're going to bring it up, I think we'll make it a bill, and things like insulin, where these, I don't know if there's shortages or they game with the patents or whatever happens, and for whatever reason the insulin isn't produced and it's more expensive than it should be. We met with a group of type 1 diabetes folks here in Rochester. They told me about the co-pays, they told me about the expense. Tough deal. Why doesn't the government go out and contract with drug companies and say, here's a generic drug. Go produce this with a fee so you recoup your capital and everything, and then let's make that available to the American people. These are things that have been around 50, 100 years, right? So there are ways to do it. We also have the legislation I talked about. And so at the end, make sure that we continue to have these incredible therapies and drug treatments, but let's not try to make the whole world have to pay exorbitant prices and go broke.
So is that a yes or no?
On what?
On Medicare negotiating
Well,
like the VA does.
yeah, but you're kind of gaming the system, or, hang on, or you're splitting the difference, actually. So I'm saying bounties, and if the government pays a bounty and makes them whole, that's the same thing. But just because the government negotiates it for VA, which is good, right, and Medicare, how are these companies, they have to make their money back. Now, you can look at it. Should they do so much advertising and all that? I'm open to all that. We should look at it. But just having the government arbitrarily say, we are going to pay you this and you're going to provide that, in the end is going to mean that they won't produce it.
No, negotiate.
Yeah.
They bargain for the VA,
Yeah.
and their insulin costs are lower. And we, as taxpayers, pay a lot of the dollars that go into research. I think all the most recent drugs started with government-funded research.
Some of it does, yeah. Some of it. I think he's negotiating now. They're looking at doing that. And as far as NIH money, yeah, we testified in front of Health and Human Services. We said that money, some of it comes back into our district, and we want to make sure that we have these therapies and these breakthroughs. I actually brought 3 students from Mayo with me to testify. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, all Americans are paying higher prices for Medicare because we are not negotiating prices. We're the only ones that don't negotiate prices. So where does that make sense?
Because I said the other countries are negotiating prices, but they're basically getting a free ride off of what we do in the United States. So that's what's happening.
Congressman, if I could just add a point to that, since I did work in Washington on CMS and at Medicare, and we dealt with the question of negotiating prices, and the difference between Medicare Part D and the VA is Medicare and the VA, you have a formulary that is very limited in the types of drugs that you can receive. So if people want to have restrictions on the types of drugs, then that would be part of the result of negotiating with the government. So I just wanted to add that. And I'll be happy to talk to you afterwards because I've spent a lot of my career working on this question.
I understand that, but if it's good enough for our vets, why isn't it good enough for us?
Well, it should be. That's fine. And by the way, since you bring up the vets, I agree with you. I'm one of those people that said if they want to go to VA for care, good. We want them to get the best care possible. If anything's going wrong, the people at VA that do wrong things should be fired expeditiously. They passed that bill. Congressman Walz voted for it. I commend him on that. But I also supported VA choice. Give the vets a choice to go choose their doctors and hospitals and get the timely quality medical care they deserve.
Thank you. Let's move on to another topic. Cindy Maves from Rochester. Cindy, where are you? Asked the question, what are you doing about workforce development?
Very good question. Actually, we're about to drop our bill. We're trying to get 3 Democrats to join us. I'll be happy if we get 1, and then we'll go from there. But we've been getting around the district, and we talked to folks, and the recurring theme is workforce development, but especially the technical training, the trades, things like that. I mean, you go to these companies, sir, fine. The unions are fine. I'm not here to criticize unions. Actually, my bill helps the unions, so here we go. So we're at Bedford Industries over in Worthington. We're at Lumacraft in St. Peter, where they make aluminum boats. We're over here in Woodnut. We're everywhere. And you know what they say? Gosh, why hasn't anybody been promoting the trades and the certificate programs and all that? Why has it always been 2- and 4-year colleges? And we need people to understand. You go to learn how to drive truck, you walk out of there, and most of them $75,000. You know, you learn how to become a machinist. It's $50,000, $60,000. These are good jobs and nice opportunities. Some of them, electricians and others. You might have your own workforce someday. And so what we found when we were looking into it is that they have these programs. They're called 529 savings programs. Maybe some of you have had them for your daughter or son, and you save money for higher education, and then you accrue it, and then the time comes, and you send them off to college and use those monies. But the problem is the 2- and 4-year colleges are at a different level than the vocational trades and the certificate programs. So what our bill's going to do, what our bill does, and I hope we can get her through, is it puts them on par. Use your 525 money, go out there for certificate programs, use it for tools, use it for apprenticeships, right there, help the unions, and let's do what we can to promote that. And because it's all good work, they're dying for work. You have construction company after construction company, you just say, hey, we could do another 20 projects right now. We just need the help. So that's one of the things that we're doing on workforce development, totally bipartisan, working with Republicans, working with Democrats. You know, I've got a few bills through Congress before I made it to Congress, and I know, got to go work with the majority party. So we're asking people on the Ways and Means Committee, where that comes from, help us. Let's work together. So I hope we can get that done.
Mary Ellen Jones of Rochester, where are you? Mary Ellen asked the question, would you cut federal funding of entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid under any circumstances?
Well, there would be reforms of programs that could change the way things are valued. But here's where we are in Social Security. You know, they sent letters around a while back. Hagedorn's going to cut Social Security and take away your Medicare and all that. I'm like, I'm the last guy that's going to do that. Promise made is a promise kept. On Social Security, people paid into the system. They were promised a deal. That's the deal they should get. Medicare, they paid into the system. They were promised a deal. That's the deal we should get. Can we reform it, try to cut costs, waste, fraud, and abuse, all that stuff? Yes. I do believe that there are ideas out there on both sides that could make those systems more solvent. But the political reality is this. Paul Ryan tried that on Medicare, and they vilified him and said he was pushing Granny off the cliff. You remember that one? Republicans have brought up ideas going back to the Reagan administration on Social Security, and they're told you're going to take it away from the elderly. So I think until both sides want to get together, show their cards, maybe it's a commission or something, we shouldn't be making changes to those programs unless both are willing to do it. So I have no, but you know,
I'm going to say absolutely no, you're not.
am I going to cut Social Security and Medicare?
Because President Trump has said that is one of his considerations to put on a budget this year. And you agree with most of what he said.
Well, there's no proposal in front of the Congress to do that. I'd be interested. I don't think the Democrats will be bringing that up to the floor, so I intend not to vote for it. How's that?
John Gifford of Rochester. John, where are you? John asks, what are farmers feeling about the tariffs, and do you see Minnesota legalizing recreational marijuana?
I can't. I just had a deal on recreational marijuana in the session with the governor and the legislature. I don't believe that passed, so you'd have to ask those officials at that level as to what's going to happen. I can't predict the House and the Senate here and all that. But as far as the tariffs and the trade issues, you know, we got to start backwards a little bit. During the campaign, the president, Donald Trump, promised that he was going to go in there and renegotiate the trade deals. He thought that we were getting a bum deal, and one of the worst was with China. We've gone through how that kind of happened. I will say this going across the district, that farmers, for the most part, vast majority, I used to say 19 out of 20, it's probably still about that, understand what's being done with China. It wasn't good, and we have to have a better deal for the future, and if we get it right, it's going to help farmers and agriculture, and all these other deals with Japan and Canada and Mexico and so forth going to help. That having been said, I'm one of those people, I'm a free trader. I want to drop the barriers down, expand the markets, have a place to have stable commodity markets, because we're selling around the world the finest agriculture and other products made anywhere. And our farmers can compete with anyone. We just got to go out there, and at the federal level, that's one of our responsibilities. Expand trade, have good deals. But we can't allow China to steal our intellectual property, manipulate currency, and do things like dumping. I testified in front of the International Trade Commission about a month ago for the Cambria company. China is dumping quartz into the United States and trying to bankrupt that company, trying to put them out of business. This is what they did with steel. 20 years ago, China had 5% of the nation's steel totals. That's what they were selling to the world, 5%. Now it's like 50. You don't get there through innovation and hard work. You get there by dumping it and running people out of business, so you're the only game in town. We can't allow that to happen. We lost too many jobs, and it hurt our economy. In the case of Cambria, they ruled 5-0 in their favor, and they're going to dump a big tariff on China to punish them for what they're doing in that area. And that's 1,000 jobs in our area over in Le Sueur County, in Blue Earth County, and places like that. So we have to protect when they cheat and when they do things. But yes, we want to get that worked out, have trade agreements to expand, and I think in the end that'll be the best thing for farmers. But it's been tough. And in agriculture, if I can just talk about agriculture for a minute. So agriculture has been 5 or 6 tough years. It's been low commodity prices, high input costs. It's farming. It goes up and down. My dad was a farmer and all that. We know how it works. You have a good year or two and you hang on for dear life and you keep farming and you try to get back to that point in many respects. We're talking about the weather, and it's been tough. Late winter, a lot of rain, and more of it, and it's hurt. But that's why we have the Farm Bill. And I have 3 things we try to do: the trade, keep the farmers in business when times are tough, and drive down the cost by reforming government. The reason I support the Farm Bill is that the first part of that Farm Bill is to make sure that we have the best, most efficient, most incredible, genius production agriculture in all the world that feeds not just our country, but it feeds everyone around the world. I say it, it is the envy of the world. It's unbelievable. You walk into the grocery store, there is an array of choices there at affordable prices, and it doesn't happen in every country. In Venezuela, they lost 25 pounds apiece because there's no food in the grocery stores. You can argue why that is, but we want to make sure that we always have that food production and that we support our farmers to do that. That's the best way to have an opportunity to feed the American people. The second part of the Farm Bill that I support is the nutrition program. And that means when people are down and out for whatever reason, and they need food, they need help, they need food stamp, SNAP, whatever you want to call it, that we deliver. The American people are the most generous people in the world, providing hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to people in need for their food. But I tell people the same thing. You could walk into the grocery store with a fistful of $100 bills and a bunch of EBT cards like this, but if there's nothing on the shelves, you're not eating. And so we have to make sure that we sustain our farmers and do that. And the other part is things like crop insurance, to keep on the Farm Bill where you have some disaster payments, even this stuff with trade where we want to go in there and make them whole. Why is that important to keep farmers in business generation after generation after generation? Because when you have farmers that sell out, they're usually smaller farmers. They sell out to bigger operators. Bigger operators are not bad people. Most of them are terrific people, but it means fewer people holding the land, fewer people working the land, fewer people living in our rural communities, fewer people going to our schools, fewer people shopping in our small businesses on main streets. It puts enormous pressure on our communities that because of just the way it is with production agriculture, and you need fewer people, they're already under incredible stress. And so that's why our priority was sustain agriculture and our rural way of life, and I'm trying to do that every day on the Ag Committee, and I'll fight for the farmers every day.
Congressman. 1/3 of the economy in Olmsted County is from small business. 1/3 from ag, and 1 is from healthcare.
Yeah.
1 in 3 jobs come from small business. What is going on in Congress to really help the backbone of American economy and this community's economy, small business?
Well, more needs to be done in Congress, and I think small business gets overlooked too much, and you're right. Most of the jobs are created down there, and then they build up into bigger jobs and opportunities. And so we have to try to do everything we can to level the playing field between big business, corporations, even government, because they compete against small business and the small businesses. One of the best things that we can do is have portable benefits. The concept that individuals would go out and procure their own benefits, negotiate, and then they can go to whatever employer they want and say, how much will you help me with that? It could be their retirement programs. It can be their health care programs. It can be flexible spending accounts. I'll give you another one. This is another bill we're working on. It's a bigger one. Everybody in the country should have a flexible spending account. You shouldn't have to work for a big corporation or the government to go out there and use your tax-free money for medical care, eyeglasses, dentistry. All that's ridiculous. But if you work for a small business, it's going to be tough to pull that off. If you're an individual business person, tough to pull that off. If you work for some of the churches and nonprofits, tough to do. So we support those types of things. Basically, get the regulations down. Federal regulations are onerous, toughest on smaller businesses because they don't have the money to comply. They don't have the money to compete with all the lawyers you need and the compliance people. Just look at the banks. In 2010, they passed something called the Dodd-Frank Act. That was Obamacare for banks. They said banks were too big to fail. Well, now the banks are too big to fail. But what's happened because of all the regulations and the punishment on the banking industry, not the big banks, but the smaller ones because of Dodd-Frank. Community banks are going out of business at record numbers. We're closing 1 a day. In this district, they're being swallowed up. Those community bankers are very important to dealing with our rural people and our people in our small communities. They know their customers, they care about their customers, and that's one example on regulations. Here's the fix. The executive branch agencies, and I don't care if it's EPA, agriculture, labor, whatever, they should not be regulating on bills passed by Congress without the Congress saying that those regulations are okay. The Congress writes the rules. The Congress is responsible for writing the laws. The regulators are responsible for going out there and basically implementing and so forth. Right now, Congress cedes its authority off to the regulators. They write a rule like Clean Power Plan, Waters of the United States, all this stuff in banking. Nobody has recourse except to go through the courts. Those rules should come back to the Congress. The House and the Senate should have to pass for them. Then they can go and regulate the American people. That would be just one fix we get done. Republicans passed that for years. Never got through the Senate. I support it. Hopefully we'll get it done one day.
Okay, this is the last question.
What's that?
Dodd-Frank was started to protect consumers who were pretty much destroyed by Wells Fargo and other banks. The big crash of 2006 and 2007. It's a travesty what is being done to consumers right now. There are no protections. So please don't talk about Dodd-Frank like that.
I can't say that Dodd-Frank had unintended consequences that hurt smaller banks?
No.
Okay. well, I'm going to keep saying it, ma'am. I just want you to know.
Saying that Wells Fargo continues to rob consumers.
We're not addressing that, but I understand what the purpose was behind Dodd-Frank, and you can say that it was good or bad or it's worked or it hasn't. I can just tell you that the unintended consequences of the massive regulation and the controls that they put over the banking system at the lower level has crushed community banks and smaller banks. And we have to stop that. They tried to pass a bill last year. They did this much. They said that the standards that should be applied for rules should be raised up to like $250 million. All right? It wasn't good enough because a lot of these institutions, even around here, can get up there. We have to make sure that the big banks are regulated like you want, but that the little banks are not. The little banks did not cause the problem. These people giving farm loans and housing loans in our communities did not cause whatever problem that was. They did it right, and we should protect them and defend them because they are our economy in these counties.
Congress, this is the last question. The last question is about the future and helping the students of today who are borrowing significantly to pay for college, for junior college. What can be done, do you think, to help reduce the student debt burden that many are carrying?
Yeah, we had a hearing on small business, and this just recently. It was about doctors and dentists who really run up a bill, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, and sometimes they're doing residency and they don't have a lot of money to start paying it back. And they said, maybe you can look at having a pause on interest rates. Maybe we could look again, revisit what's going on as to how we got here, because a lot of this has been transitioned over to the government. And as people have borrowed more and more, somehow the tuition rates have followed. And I don't know if everybody's spending up to it. I don't know if people are, it's too much kind of free money and they go out. Who knows? I mean, there's a million things. But what I said in that committee is one idea that I had, and I do not support, let's be honest with you. I don't support debt forgiveness in this area. I don't think, there are a lot of people that made a lot of decisions based upon the way it was. Some people decided they didn't want to go to college at all. Others said they didn't want to go to this particular college because it was going to cost too much. Others, like me, I worked my way through college. You do a number of things. Others said, nope, let's go. This is important to me. We're going to spend some money. We're going to get a great education. That's fine. But everybody made different decisions based upon the rules, and to come back and say, the ones that ran up the debt, we're going to make them whole, but everybody else over here, you're going to pay for it. I don't think that's fair. So what I support are two ideas to make it fair. First, everyone should be able to use pre-tax dollars to pay back their college debt. Why in the world are we doing that, right? So at least if you're out after college or in vocational, whatever, you earn money, you don't pay federal tax on that money. You can apply that and start paying off your loans. The second thing is we should put everybody in the same boat. If you're 18 years old to 30, you go out and work, you earn money, you don't pay federal tax on that money up to a credit of $20,000. But you got to go earn it. And when you earn it and it's yours, you don't give it to Uncle Sam, you kept it up to $20,000 over that period. You use that money for whatever you want. You want to buy a house, you want to try a business, you want to go on vacation, I don't know. You want to pay back your student loans, pay them back. You want to invest. But the difference is, rather than just giving it away and tell them, here, we're going to make you whole, you get them into the workforce, you get people making their own decisions, they go earn it, it's their money, they can use it the way they apply. That's what I think we should do. So.
We've reached 8 o'clock. We've gone through many questions. Many of them are duplicates. I want to thank, on behalf of the congressman, thank you all for coming, and thank you for showing up. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.